Welcome everybody to Brass Tacks Hard Facts Live, episode 9. We have Jim McCormack tonight from FDTN. And before we get rolling here, I just want to share with you something new. So other than the fact of my new haircut, and I finally got my haircut in the last 3 months, we have a new project. That is Rig Recon. You might have seen it on our socials. Sunday night we posted it. I'm going to show you the teaser now. It's from our group that did Brass Tacks Hard Facts with Brian Kerr. It's basically, if you think of Brass Tacks Hard Facts as for nozzle geeks, Rig Recon is going to be for apparatus geeks. And let's be honest, deep down inside, we all geek out a little bit about fire trucks. So we're going to kind of run the gamut from maybe a lot of the equipment you see on your truck that maybe you take for granted, from your governors to your lighting and how things work. And we're going to put episodes out every week on our Rig Recon socials. So I just want to take a quick minute here, show you the teaser for that, and then we'll bring on Jerry and Jim. So that's it, everybody. Our teaser trailer for Rig Recon. So do me a favor, when we're all done here, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Rig Recon. Give us a follow. We're going to have great new episodes coming out every week, and we're going to really go after your inner apparatus geek and show you some pretty cool things. So anyway, let's bring on Jerry and Jim. I'm going to take us off here for a second. And right now we have Jerry and Stretch. We're waiting for Jim to get on. He's having a little bit of technical difficulties. So why don't you take it for a second here, Jerry?
Yeah, we this is a reality, folks. We are live, so it's been working for a half an hour, but let's give it a minute and have them sign back in. Welcome back, everybody. We're 5/20/2020. We're excited about this episode tonight. Stretch is working to get Jimmy back up on the screen. We're going to go deep into training. Training is something we all talk about, but I can guarantee you by the end of tonight's session, you'll have a deeper understanding of the elements that are involved in a successful training program. So, Jim, you're on. You can hear me now, Jim?
Yeah, for now.
Okay. Stretch, go ahead. Do your open.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging in so far. Tonight, we have a pretty cool episode with Jim McCormack. If you don't know Jim, he's going to go deep a little bit about his background, but he is essentially the Walt Disney of what firemen like to call the firefighters' Disney World, which is the Fire Department Training Network, FDTN, just outside of Indianapolis. It's a great place to get realistic hands-on training. I've been very fortunate to become friends with Jim over the last couple of years with some of our work. My predecessors have worked with Jim for a long time with Elkhart Brass, supplying them and helping them get off the ground there. So tonight's going to be very loose. So any kind of Q&As, throw them up there. We will try to get to as many as we can and keep the dialogue rolling. If you miss it, if you catch a run in the middle of this, if you want to share it tomorrow, it will be up on our YouTube channel in about 24 hours. So you go to the Elkhart Brass YouTube page and find it there. So I'll pass it over to Jerry. What's up, Jerry?
All right, great. Hey, hello again, everybody. We're real proud to have Jim involved with this tonight. As Chris was saying, we've been involved with Jim and FDTN for a long time. And I always speak very highly of Fire Department Training Network and what Jim's accomplished there, especially with the level of cadre that he utilizes. For what it's worth, I had a realization that it was so good that if either of my children ever decided to follow me in the firehouse, that I would go with them and take every course with them that's available before they ever went to an academy anywhere else. For what that's worth, I've never heard a negative come from anyone that's had an experience there, and it does nothing other than trigger a desire to return. So if you're not aware of FDTN, you will be after tonight. But Jim, why don't you give us a little background on yourself and the what drove you to start FDTN?
So I just retired last year from the Indianapolis Fire Department, and my kind of journey through there, I started in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, and I went to college for forestry, actually, so kind of thought I'd do the forest firefighting. My family had been involved in the fire service and some organizations for a long time, and I'm not sure if I just resisted getting involved in it or what happened. You know, I was kind of there on the periphery a lot, but eventually got hired in the town of Hopkinton and started my journey there. And I'll kind of talk through how I ended up in Indianapolis. But my father, he was kind of big in training, and I was just talking to Chris when we were getting warmed up here. And, you know, back in the early 60s, he with a bunch of local guys in Massachusetts and, you know, a bunch of state directors of training in different states, they were trying to standardize some training, which really didn't seem to exist out there. And what's funny about it is that they did all the same things that we're all still trying to do today, but they did it without Wi-Fi and the click of a switch to be able to talk like we're talking right now. And so I think, you know, they did monumental things way back then. And so his kind of path was in the mid 60s, him and a bunch of guys ended up creating some legislation or getting it done in Massachusetts to start the Mass Fire Academy. And so as a kid, I was just hanging out over there. You know, I'd always want to go to work and see what was going on. And, you know, they were at the root level of kind of organized training way back in the 60s, which, as we all know, you know, we've come light years ahead and it's moving exponentially right now. But way back then, they were just focused on the basics because nobody was standardizing it anywhere. And, you know, it seemed to be working for him. And so he did that for, I think, 8 or 9 years, and finally left there and took over as the executive director of ISFSI, which is kind of reincarnated again today. But way back then, it was just the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, and they were based out of Ashland, right next to Hopkinton, Massachusetts. And, you know, they were trying to push training initiatives forward as well. So their big flagship was FDIC. And so that was my introduction to FDIC. And I worked in the background while I was working on the fire department there a long time. And eventually it ended up in the mid 90s in Indianapolis, which I took a test when they had the books open, and going back and forth to FDIC and then going back and forth to try to get on, things just worked out and I got hired in Indianapolis. So that kind of brought me here. And all the while I was working in the background with ISFSI, and the one thing I'd always have conversations with them about was that it wasn't really doing anything for me as a street level firefighter in the town right next to this world headquarters. You know, I just thought that, you know, for what they said they were supposed to be doing, it just wasn't hitting the meat and potatoes. And I was a brand new guy in a fire department with what I have come to know over time, a lot of guys that were really, really knowledgeable. And they were teaching the stuff that needed to be taught to successfully perform on the fire ground. And it was really at that root level it was happening, that one-on-one or the interaction in small groups, and not so much the big organizations that were getting it done. So I just decided one day to try to take my cut at what I felt they weren't doing, and hence the Fire Department Training Network was created. So we started it as a monthly newsletter, and the theory behind that was, I think every one of us has always picked up those magazines, and it used to be you'd flip to the back to read Tom Brennan, and you'd read that one, and then maybe you'd make your way through something else, but really that was what you were looking for to read up on. That was the street level material. It wasn't polished. It was just like he'd had a conversation with us, and that was the intent of the network and the newsletter we started putting out. And in the moving back and forth, working in the background of FDIC, we started doing a little bit of training as well. And it started taking off. So I think we started in '96, the network, and we moved to Indianapolis in '98. So it was a little bit of on the road training, not a whole lot. It was just doing that newsletter all the time. And what I tell everybody out there listening, and there's a lot of new guys writing stuff in the magazines and out there. It may be just a vent session for you, but I think you'll find when you put something like that out that was real meat and potatoes stuff, that it validates a lot of what other guys are thinking. So I think that stuff all helps, and it's what the network kind of started rolling forward with. Moved to Indianapolis, and at the time, Indy lost 2 guys in '92 in a flashover. And so they were one of the few departments in the country that actually had this new flashover chamber way back then. And it was pretty good. It was some pretty good hot fires in there. But it was just local to Indy. So another crazy idea, a couple of guys out here said, let's just build one and put it on a trailer and haul it all over the place. So for a few years, we just hauled this trailer all over the place. Every weekend we were booked full, and it was great. But it was the Flintstones version of a flashover trailer, I can tell you. We had floor jacks and 4 different lengths of 6x6s to jack the burn unit up. And what we learned now, and I wish we knew then, was we never had to jack it up. We do it on a single level, and it works just fine. So we did that for a few years, and as things would progress, I always wanted to find a piece of land. So in 2001, we found a piece of land and an older couple that, let us write our own ticket to how we paid for it. And that was the start of the actual physical site. So all the while doing training to try to get better at work and meeting people along the way, which was the big thing. And, I think in this day and age, meeting people is a whole lot easier. I mean, it's easier to get to them. It's easy to talk to them. But you see pockets, and what I'm always amazed at is those pockets that you see all over the place are always the same people. So I go to Florida, I see you guys all the time, or I go to Portland, I see you guys. The thing is, it's always those same people that are getting together trying to push things forward. And so anyways, to kind of wrap it up, we got this piece of land, and in 2001, without too many ideas of what to do, no big construction background, and no money to have somebody else build it for us, we figured out a way to use these containers, which worked really well for us on the trailer. So we built a container building, and since then we built and burned a couple down, and built some more, to the point that I think we have probably 16 different burn buildings now. And, to get to what we're going to talk about with the training, what happens in those 16 different buildings is exactly the same thing. It's basic fundamental hose stretches. It's basic fundamental searches. And as you get through the classes, the conditions ramp up to try to make them as real as possible. And I think that was the whole goal. I always wanted to go to work and fight a fire that we would have thought out intimately out here at the site to map out so we could learn here. That was always the goal. It may all be red buildings, but I can tell you that's supposed to be that commercial building I wanted in Indy tomorrow night, or the residence fire that we wanted there. And so that's kind of how it evolved. And, it's just kind of moving along. It moves a little bit at a time. We don't ever get crazy in debt or anything like that. We have more than enough to train on, but we always like to add something more so people would want to come back. Like you said, hopefully they have a good experience, and our job as the people handing it off, besides handing the material off, is to try to make that experience good enough that they want to come back again and do more. And so, what we'll talk about tonight, hopefully, is, a lot of the training that you have to do is so static because you don't have a facility. But at the end of the day, when we first started training out here, it was just a big gravel pit. So don't think the facility alone is what you need. I think you just need to have a good grasp on the material and then find ways to do it every day.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. I tell you, I think you should take that last comment and just kick things off with that right there. Is it an excuse not to train because you don't have a fancy facility? Let's start with that.
Yeah, and I mean, so I think a lot of times places don't have a facility, maybe because it wasn't really their priority. Maybe as much as they like to say it was, it's not. But I see pictures every day on the internet of guys showing what their company did for training that day. And if it was an engine company, it's usually some type of hose stretch. And I've been very fortunate as the networks evolve. We have a group of people that we've been together for years. And I know that when they go back to work, they're doing the same stuff that I would do at work. It's some form of training. And sometimes it's not real elaborate stuff. It's just maybe some mental stuff. It's something to get guys going. And I'd say that the trick for me throughout my career anyway was to try to build the training into the everyday routine of the crew. And I think in doing that, we did training without ever talking about doing training. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. That, so one of the things I know I was beat up for, and, I will tell you that stuff takes a toll on you, but, I look at it much more fondly since I retired than I did when I was living right in the middle of it. But setting the aerial up on every run was something that a lot of people really didn't like. But what it did for the guys on the crew is made them so proficient at it that it was not even thought about when they showed up on a fire. It was going up. There was not even a question of whether it was going to reach the building because they had done it so many times that it was going to happen. And so since that was an everyday thing, an every run thing, training was built in. And the only thing that would mean they weren't going to do that was we had no runs that day, which didn't happen all that often. And in the busy years, the training would get validated because we would have a lot of fires. So that training was validated. So, I say all that stuff, and that's all good if you have the fires and you can do it. But if you don't have the fires and you can't do it, you have to find a way to continue to show up every day and do that training. Mm-hmm. Makes sense?
Yep.
Absolutely.
So, I would hope if people have questions, but if we can go through a little bit.
Why don't you want to throw up your first couple slides there, Jim, that we had going on where, what you actually train and what you actually do. I think you kind of had some humorous videos you were showing us.
Yeah, so I'm going to say realistic fire training is not what I'm going to show you next. So just kind of remember that, and then we'll go from there. Tell me when you're ready. Ready?
Yeah, hit it again there, Jim.
All right, so, just a little maybe icebreaker, I guess. And then it's not this next slide also. So we talk about all those things, and really at the end of the day, you don't need live fire to make training real. I think that's one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have. They get bored with the mundane, but it really is the mundane that makes success on the fire ground. It's pulling that line from the bed enough times that you've experienced anything that you could possibly experience at that level, so that it's not a big deal on a real fire. And there's plenty of places out there where people do it. I know a lot of the guys still down in Christiana, Delaware, and Bobby and Mike Presser, Mike Lombardo, a couple other guys are still out there. They pull those lines every time, even if it's not a fire, if it's just an alarm run or something. And I would challenge anybody out there to start doing that, and then look and see how much better you get at a hose stretch by doing it all the time. Because most of the time, if we were to say, hey, let's go stretch lines, nobody would want to do it. It's just too boring for them or something. But, the reality is, just like setting the aerial up, doing it in a live area is what you would have to do for real. And, at the end of the day, you've done it so many times. Now at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're a little bit foggy and you're still trying to wake up, you just go through the motions of stretching that line. If the coupling gets hooked somehow in the cross lay, all of a sudden it's not a big deal. You can fix that problem and then move on. But if you haven't moved enough hose to encounter those problems to realize how you can quickly fix those problems, or maybe even prevent them because you just do it enough, you haven't trained enough. You haven't trained enough to be proficient and ready to go. And I think so. There's a couple more slides, I think. And you can find these all on the internet. That's where I kind of came across them a little bit. But that dog, if you watch him, the poor guy. So if you look at that, that's pretty funny. And if you saw that original post on Facebook, what was even funnier is all of the people talking about how that was inhumane to the dog. And so you think about that, there's a lot of talk about all those things. And so again, if you are the person or the company that's going out and doing this training, I have to tell you, I wish it would be liked and well received by everybody in your department, but it's not going to be. And so you have to come to grips with that one pretty early on. Otherwise, it will derail you. It'll become one of those things. And I think the next slide is another funny one. I'm kind of into dogs a little bit. And here, this poor little boy wanted to teach his dog how to do some stuff. So his father told him there was some YouTube videos. And sure enough, this kid was smart. He started teaching his dog. And I think when you think about all those things, and we talk about some of the problems with training or realistic training, it ends up being a lot of that stuff. And I know towards the end of my career, it all became YouTube videos. There was never, okay, we're going to come over and show you how to do this. Everybody got a group email saying, watch this YouTube video. And that just wasn't kind of cutting it, for what we needed for training. So those would be the things that I'd say we need to look at in terms of training itself and trying to move forward with it. So I'd say, as we click the next slide, we go through a couple of them. We want to watch all these videos. So here, if we just look at these things, it really is training requirements today have increased exponentially. And I would say most guys, they're force-fed computer training for EMS for all the things that they have to do. And, it's just a reality out there. But really, we're going to the firehouse for 24 hours, most of us. And what I would say is if you can't find 20 minutes to do some real training or an hour to do some real training, I would even say put a time limit on it, just do something of value for the guys. And I think that will help a whole bunch. And we could all take the other approach to it and just complain about why, we have to do this other stuff. And credentialing, accreditation, certification standards, all these things, they're what people drive training with in a lot of fire departments. But unfortunately, in the last line in that little paragraph says it's the administration's measure of proficiency. And all I would tell you is through my whole career, the only thing I ever wanted to accomplish as an officer was to show up with the crew that with the worst possible thing going on, the chief would want our crew to go to work. And to do that, it takes a lot of effort. And I think, most of the guys I've been fortunate to hang around with for many, many years were all of that same mindset. And I know, I'm watching the names pop up here. I know a lot of the guys watching or listening right now, they have that same mindset. So just understand that there's going to be a little bit of adversity in the workplace to accomplish the level of proficiency and performance you want. So just come to grips with that early. And if that will help a little bit. And then, the last one, check boxes and empty training hours are not training. They really, truly aren't. If I was deficient at one thing at work, it was probably logging the amount of training that we actually did. That was probably, it didn't really matter a whole lot to me, and I logged what I had to, but all of the low-level stuff that just made us better at what we do, that was really just stuff we did every day to try to get things moving and be proficient. So I hope that helps guys a little bit, because really without the right mindset, it's going to be really tough to try to keep things moving every day. And, without the fires, which is one of those excuses that is used a lot to not do training, without the fires, really that's secondary to your level of performance, because it could be the fire tomorrow or the fire tonight, or somebody leaves this webinar here and goes on a run and they need to be able to perform. And so just think about those things. So there's a lot of the interpersonal mental stuff you have to come to grips with. And then you have to get guys on a company that want to perform the same way. And, that's a difficult, another whole discussion in terms of, trying to do that. As an officer, I think it's way more difficult than it is if you're not the officer, because I think guys can move in and out of positions that aren't the officer in maybe pairs, or a couple guys can get in, and with the right mindset, they can do much more that way. And they really shouldn't be waiting for it to be officer led anyway. A good officer is going to do it, but really in one of the slides and some of the other programs that we do on this training, it says training is absolutely your responsibility, no matter what. And I think to come up with the types of topics to train on, you just need to stay at that root level. If you take an engine, if you're on an engine, or a truck, you're on a truck, you ought to be able to find a year's worth of training just walking around the engine or walking around the truck. And it's probably going to be the same 10 or 15 things, but that's what you have to do over and over again.
Totally agree. And that's, it's funny that, in my experience, it's not usually the complex thing that you're doing that breaks down. It's a failure at the very basic level. And that, you always hear the term, we're going back to basics, and it's a good term, but understand what it truly means. It's a task-oriented job. They need to be mastered through frequency, because that's where it normally breaks. It was interesting. We went deep a week or so ago on that personal sense of ownership and how that breeds enthusiasm at the company level. I loved your comment about, you don't need a boss to tell you to stretch a line. But, you're hanging around a firehouse, train. Like that's your job function. And now you're doing it with someone that you're expected to be able to perform well with.
Right.
And then it breeds from there. So, that personal sense of ownership, I always had, and I encourage firefighters to have a personal training plan. What are you looking to accomplish? And it's like when you shared the story of how this all started, it was originally to make yourself a better firefighter. That's why you were trying to get something going.
Right. It was easier to do this and more enjoyable than it was to go out and frame houses. So that was, at the end of the day, maybe selfish, but it was just for that reason. And there really isn't a lot of it out there. And I think it's pretty tough to go find it. And so it does serve a purpose, and I wish more people were doing it, because at the end of the day, it's not really difficult to do. It doesn't take a lot to pull it off. But we all suffer from the more is better mentality. And really all we need is something pretty simple and primitive to do things with, so not to bash the doll houses, because I know a lot of people are using them. I've never constructed one, but just looking at it, it sure looks like it'd take a lot of effort to build one. And so I think I asked in Portland, I said, how many have done it? And, a bunch of people raised their hands, and they're able to do it and then light a fire in that little dollhouse in the backyard of the firehouse. So my question was, how many could build a 8x10 shed in the back of the firehouse? Well, plenty could. And so why couldn't you build an 8x10 shed and drywall a little room in there and now have the fire in that little room? And, guys said, it couldn't happen. But, so somehow you got to look at it and get a little bit more. I mean, standing outside goes back to that picture of all those people taking pictures of a burning house is not training. And so going inside, it might be, I told the other guys to say, if you could get a storage container and put in the back of the firehouse to store stuff, and then you built your dollhouse and opened the double doors on the container and walked to the end of the dollhouse and did the drill in there, now you can have a real search drill trying to get out. And if you did that, it would be smoke from the dollhouse, which is acceptable, but they wouldn't let you light the container off in the back there. So you have to be creative also. And I'm not saying get yourself in trouble. I'm probably over-exaggerating here a little bit, but be creative in the training so that you're able to perform when you're ready to do it. And there's plenty of ways to do that. At some point, to up your game, you're going to have to move into more realistic training environments to get better to perform. And we talked about this before we went on, and that is, we're all really, really good at skills training, but we're not that good at operational level training. We don't do well at combining a bunch of skills and then having people working together at the same time to simulate the chaos that would happen on a real fire, but still keep focus and perform your task. Because, either it takes too much effort, or we can't get enough people to do it, or we really just haven't thought it out well enough. And, a case in point, I'd say a conversation I had this week, the guy said that, in some of the search training he played an audio tape of radio traffic in the background. And I said, so to me, it would be way more valuable to have somebody outside being the chief and having those guys doing the search training actually talk on the radio like they're supposed to talk when they're doing a search for real. And then if you want more traffic, we'll eventually run that drill when there's an engine company drill going on, doing the same thing with the chief outside and radios inside, and make them both operate on the same channel. Now it's real. They're dealing with real stuff, and they have to figure out how to deal with it. And so that is how you make training realistic, bit by bit, and putting skills together into operations. And I think, again, we do really good at skills, but combining them is what happens on the fire ground. And it's the one thing we're not doing enough of in training. We're not combining them in a way that's real so that it plays out on the training ground like it would play out on the fire ground. and we have all the stuff to do it.
I'm gonna throw this question up from Nate Schuler, Jim. It should post all of it. But again, how do you take that one room, one burn room Connex structure and make it different and challenging time and time again? So you kind of hinted a little bit of like getting creative, or I guess, I kind of threw one to you the other day of, when you started FDTN, what was the first prop you built, right? So you talked about a flashover chamber. So if you had this thing and you took it all over the state or the region, how did you keep it fresh and creative and challenging, even though there's just a box on wheels,
So I'll tell you and I'll jump in on the answer, but the simplest thing we ever did to that flashover chamber that took it up a notch was we put a window on the back end. And it's become the signature VES that we've done for years. And I see it all over the place now, and I think it's fantastic. But that one thing made it different. And now all of a sudden they were doing something a little different. And so you take that one thing and then I'll go to the one room container. But if you had the typical flashover chamber had two doors, one on each side, where the students entered and could go out. By putting a window in there, now you would go in the window, do a VES drill in some really difficult, tough conditions, and then come out. So you still have two doors. So now you can take, and so that it doesn't get boring, you don't do the VES drill. You go in and you do a search drill, and now they bring the victim to the window rather than going in and coming back out the window. So you just mix it up that way and to go more in the container. So if you had a 40-foot container, and I would tell you, if you're ever getting containers, get a 40. At the end of the day, they're cheaper than a 20, and you can do way more with a 40. But let's just say you had a 40-foot container and you had a burn room on the end of it. One hallway down the middle of that container can change everything up. So a hallway with a door in the middle, or three doors in that wall that you put right down the middle of it. And on one drill, they go through this door. On another drill, they go through the next door. On one drill, they go through this door and back through this door. And now all of a sudden, you're hitting all of the things of a single level hose stretch. You're moving right, you're moving left. You could even make it come back around and then go down again. That's what makes it interesting, and it's not boring. And I think to truly answer the question is you need to be, so I tell everybody out there that's doing training, be the student of your training session and be honest when you're the student and just poke as many holes as you can. What is the peanut gallery going to say about your training session? And if you haven't answered and accommodated or taken those questions or comments into account before the training session ever starts, then you're not ready to run that training session. So I know a guy's going to say, well, I've been in there this many times, so I'm just going to go do it. And it's like, by all means, go do it. Here's the door. You've been in 100 times, should take no time at all. And then what's he going to encounter when he gets to the first point he was going to move forward? What do you think I would put there for him? I would put a wall. So he knew that he was going to be able to go straight down that hallway, but now he's got a wall. And now he has to start dealing with making decisions and overcoming hurdles in that fire environment. So a 40-foot container would be very simple to modify, and you could even put additional doors on the sides of the container. So instead of coming in the end, now you come in the side. And if you come in the side, you don't go right to the fire. Maybe the first times you do, so you come in, you go straight in, easy fire, not a big deal. So that's good. So the next time you want to make it difficult, make them go across and through a door with that hallway and make a hard 90-degree turn and see if they're good at moving hose around that first pinch point. And then you want to get even better, make them come in the side door, have a door on the very back end away from the fire, and make them go all the way back through that door and then all the way around. And now it's a completely different layout again. I can promise you this, that I'll let you look and memorize the layout of a building that we have here on the site. But once we crank it up with heat, smoke, and real fire, you're going to have no idea how to make your way. Because it's something about heat and smoke that changes your mindset. And until you've done it enough and enough and enough, you're going to be thrown off by that every single time. And now, you want to make it interesting, don't let them go with the same people all the time. So this company comes in, and I'm a true believer in company training and company performance, but you can hide a lot of things in a company. I call it the firehouse shuffle, where the guy's there all the time, but he steps back and he's not really involved, and somebody else steps up and they're involved and they're doing it. So I would say, mopping the kitchen floor after dinner is the first thing you look for with any new people coming in the firehouse, because you can see people that they're at the mop every single time, but never once did they have their hand on it. And they've never actually used that mop on the floor. But they're masters of being the first one there and, starting a conversation while the other guy doesn't want to stand around anymore. So he gets a damn mop and the mop water goes mops the floor. And that happens in training too. So mix it up. And now taking that officer with different crew members, now you really got to see if the officer knows his stuff and is he able to help his crew members perform the skill. And I think of Timmy Klatt and the guys in New York all the time. Unlike where I was in Indianapolis, I had the same crew all the time. But Timmy and those guys, they have a different crew all the time. I don't even know how you pull that off. I mean, so training is really important at that point, because you're never getting the same people at the same time. So it's a long answer, but I hope that helps answer how you take and you challenge people in that 40-foot container for as long as you're using the 40-foot container.
Perfect. Thank you.
So do we get any more questions, or is this all?
Let's keep rolling with your slides here for now, Jim.
Okay. So I'd say, let's see, I'll just click through them, I think. Maybe. So a couple things here, and then we'll move to another one. So this has been lost. The competence on the fire ground has kind of been lost. And it's one of those things that you go to any department, it seems like a lot of them, and I'm not generalizing too much, but they always have a reason why they can't do this type of training. They don't have the money for the smoke machine, or, we don't have a facility to do it. But it really is about setting this up and letting guys run through it. And, here's another little nugget, I guess. When you're training somebody, you're giving them something, but just understand they're going to learn it if you're doing it right. They're going to learn. And if you had 6 people in the group, 6 people are probably going to learn at different paces and different ways. And some of the stuff that they have to learn or get better at has to be done in the live training session. If they hit kinks in a hose line, you can talk to them all day long about moving hose around a corner and then moving hose around 2 corners at the same time. But the way they're really going to learn it is you set the training environment up to put those 2 corners in there, and you position the corners right at the point where it's going to be difficult. So you don't put a corner and then let them defeat that corner and then have another one waiting right there for them to defeat them both, and then they're done with it. You make them go a ways, and then they're thinking, oh, we've got this thing, and then you throw another corner in. And so, a couple drills we run in some classes, we have an early obstacle and we have a late obstacle. So they would come in early, have to go right upstairs, and then stretch a line probably 80 to 90 feet to hit the fire. And then we have another drill that they go in, they stretch 80 to 90 feet, and then they have to go up that set of stairs and hit the fire. 2 completely different drills. They're both dealing with stairs and corners, but at different points. And so because of that, they're working those problems throughout the entire hose stretch. and they're not getting conditioned into working them all at the same point. Goes back to, I think it was Nate, to the
Nate.
of how do you make it challenging? And that simple little difference makes it challenging. And I can tell you, if you want, set it up with a setback out front that the pre-connect will run short if they're not paying attention. Now they have a third thing to deal with. And I wouldn't make it run short by taking 50 feet out of it. I would put some obstacles out there so the engine couldn't get close enough, so they actually ran short because they ran out of the same amount of line that they would always have. Taking hose out isn't going to help them.
We recently reconfigured some hose beds on our job and kind of how we deploy on extended lines. And, when we go to do our live burn training, everybody kind of has the same repetition, and we kind of changed it now where we stage companies. So not everybody's getting at the same time. We can see what's happening. But the last time we did it, we actually locked the gate to the training center. So, and that was the challenge from day one, because you're used to just pulling in, parking in the same spot, everything's groovy, and all of a sudden the gate's locked, and it's like, is this for real? It's like, yeah, you got to force the gate position. Are you going to drive your rig in? You do the long stretch, whatever it is. So those little things, I think, that can get you out of your routine, right? Because I think when you come to training, you already have an anticipation of how this is going to go. This is what we did last time. They probably going to do the same thing. Maybe we got to stretch up and set it down. But those little things, I think one of the things that Cody Trust Trails group does that I've seen at Portland, and other guys do it. So if it was your idea first, great. But I think it's cool is, they just take the swinging gate and they go get 2 5-gallon Home Depot buckets and put a locked swinging gate on the Charlie side, right? So we're always big on, hey, you got to get a 360. And now when I go to get a 360, there's just a locked gate there. So, it's a very simple forcible entry fix, but it's just enough to jam you up to get you out of the mindset of, I'm constantly used to just doing a quick lap and now we go. Well, now all of a sudden I got a fence or a victim hanging out the window or whatever else. It's just another thing to, add on that you're not expecting. And that's, I think, back to your creativity comment with limited budget, building, whatever else you have. It's getting people out of that zone a little bit.
Well, and I would agree 100%, because you don't know what that obstacle is going to do to the rest of the operation. That's the whole thing. And if you set them off and it just frustrates them on the front end of it, who knows what's going to happen on the back end. And if it does blow it up and it goes really wrong, there's a whole talking point. And that's what you're looking for. If a drill goes wonderful and they nailed everything, sometimes it's just you come out, you guys did a heck of a job. You don't need to say anything bad. But in training, and you do have to take the kid gloves off a little bit, if they screw up, you got to kind of tell them they screwed up. And if you don't, then you're hurting yourself. And I mean, we're all in that mode of you can't talk bad to them. You got to tell everybody did a good job. It's like, give me a friggin' break. Really? You did a good job? Is that what you would want? You can't come down with a hammer. And, I've been accused of doing that a lot, but I'm much softer, since I'm only 4 years old now. So I'm much softer in this version 2, they tell me. But maybe
Jim 2.0.
Yeah. So, but you do have to be honest with it. You have to have honest evaluations. And, we talk to different groups, and I've been fortunate, and we always see the same people all the time. And in those groups, self-reflections probably happening quite often. Those guys all want to perform at the highest level. They want to be the best at what they do. So it's pretty easy for guys to self-reflect and try to get better. So, there wasn't a fire we went on that we wouldn't try to do something better. We'd talk about something. And, I can tell you some guys don't like that. And those guys, they didn't last long on the company, but that was just a mindset that you always come away trying to do better the next time. But throwing all those things in training They have to come, and it kind of brings up, to talk about the training aspect of it. We kind of misalign the objectives of training a lot. We set a training session up, and if it's an evolution for an engine to come in and put a fire out, we think that's all it is. But really, if that's all it is, that should just be a polished skill at the end of a whole bunch of training. And I think we do it a lot. And it first showed up a lot in the early RIT training. When it first hit the circuits, late 90s, 2000, everyone would say, all right, let's do some RIT training. They would throw a guy in, cover him with all kinds of crap, and then tell the guys to go get him. And they wondered why they didn't do so well. And as you look at it now and say, well, now if you break down packaging the patient, break down the drags, maybe moving a guy upstairs, moving a guy downstairs, out a window, all of a sudden, all those skills, which are the basic skills, became the success points of how to pull off a RIT operation. But too many people were just throwing them into the RIT operation and not actually doing the training to get the results they wanted. So a lot of times, if you're not getting the results you wanted, and I tell this for everyone out there that's doing the training, don't blame it on the students. If you know me out here at the network, if it's not happening the right way and the students are performing badly, the guys will tell you, the first person I'm talking to is the guys running that station. And we're going to look at the station and make sure we didn't mess something up that was causing this to not work out. Because I'm not blaming the students, because if they're coming here at this high level of training, then the training should be helping them to get to a level to perform the skill better. So you really have to look at that. And then when it comes to objectives, don't overdo it. So I saw a post, and we talked about this the other day. I saw a post on the internet, and it said you should never black out when you're doing search training. And there was a whole bunch of comments, and I wasn't going to read them all. I kind of read through some of them, and I think I understand why the guy put it out there. And he even said, I'm just trying to stimulate some conversation here. But I don't have a problem using blackout masks for certain things. And the reason I don't have a problem is because it's not necessarily teaching what you think we were teaching at that station. So one of the posts said, it happens all the time with entanglement stations, and you should never not let guys cut in entanglement stations. And I can tell you, we've made a pretty successful run at doing some entanglement simulators over the years, and they're always in it, and they're always with a hood over the top of their mask, and they can never use a cutter to cut the wires. It's 8 feet of agony, and it looks like a horrible entanglement mess. And I think what I told you is, if you understand the objective of the station, as much as I, try to say it is wires, it's all about the mental space and the mental comfort of the student running through the drill. It truly has nothing to do with the wires. And the blackout mask serves a valuable purpose, because once you put it over them or tell them they have to put it on, their mental capacity is also skewed. And that's what you're looking for. In later stations, we want to get that mental capacity skewed with high heat, heavy black smoke, and visible fire at some point. But we don't want to do it on the front end of this training. We have to have some stations that we're getting into that mental comfort zone with things we can control. And so as I read down some more posts today, I don't have a problem with the blackouts, because the blackouts are trying to focus the people on the skills and moving around. What I would say is, if you're going to do any type of blackout or mask training, don't put something on the inside. And the reason I say we use hoods very specifically, and once we don't need hoods, we go right to smoke. So there's very seldom any stations that they can do where they can see. And we use hoods for us so that we can get an understanding of the students and how they're going to perform when you're inside their head a little bit. And once we know we're at a comfort level with those students, then we'll move on to something else. But the hoods provide us instant access to give them light. And that's the value of the hoods to us. They've got some fancy things you clip on the mask now. We're kind of against those too, because you can't get them off right away. And if you think about the objective of training all the time, one objective that should always be there should be to never create a situation where somebody wants to rip their mask off. And if you obscure visibility too much, especially by putting something inside, the first thing they're going to do is rip their mask off. And you've failed them. They haven't failed the station. You have failed them because you didn't set that station up well enough. And you probably failed them a little bit more because you didn't recognize them ramping up to the point that they were ready to rip their mask off. So you think about those things in terms of objectives. So I would say, go back to that burn unit question. And if you had a straight shot to put the fire out, then I would have to say, sit down, and it was Nate, sit down, and you can email me, tomorrow, whatever. If you were going to set a drill up to run down that box and put a fire out, tell me what the objective of that training was. Because you'd have to dial it in. I want people to do that at some point, but the objective for me might be to breathe a quarter of a bottle of air, and that was the only objective. They got to put a fire out, and they got to work in smoke, but they were only breathing air. You understand what I'm saying? So it's just align those objectives, because sometimes we do too much. If you have, it's kind of, you can use all the stuff that none of us like the span of control and incident command or something like that, and then just apply that to the objectives you have in training. And if you have more than the span of control, then you're probably missing the mark. So all the stuff we use is there, but there should only be a couple. And I can tell you, like, a lot of our objectives for hose stretches are, we want them to make one right-hand turn and then move the line straight, whether it was on the front end or the back end. And eventually we're going to want them to make a right-hand turn and then a left-hand turn. Those are the objectives. We want them in, smoke environment, and we want them in real fires and heat environment. But those are the building blocks of how to get there, and just understanding what you're trying to accomplish in training. And sometimes people look at it and say, well, that's not enough. And I would say, if you say it's not enough, then it's probably already too much. Because, most people, if you give them, going way back, I don't think I finished, but, about the training, when you set this session up, get people that, if they're friends, they'll tell you the truth, but let them shoot holes in it. What would every student say? What would you say if you're a student at the station you just delivered? And if you would say something negative, then you need to build that out of that station right now, because it was a legit, if you would say it's negative, I thought bullshit, we wouldn't do that for real. And if you wouldn't do it for real, then you probably shouldn't. If the objective of that station was to do everything for real. And that's where I go back to that blackout or don't black out in search training. When I want them to go in and search a building or a room, we'll make them search a room. But right now we're doing something else. We want them to move together. We want them to talk to their partner. We want them to not have visibility so they can do all this, so that someday if they turn a flashlight on and just get this calming glow of white, it may shake them out of that mental space that was throwing them off cue. Right now, we don't need that. We don't need that on the front end. We'll get to that at a certain point. And then when we get to real live drills, anything's available. And what we try to do here with the buildings we have is we really truly try to not tell them they can't do anything. We want them to be able to do whatever they would say, because if they can come out and say that's bullshit, if this was real, we would do that, then I have to kind of give it to them. Aside from the fact that if they were going to, cut through the side of 3 containers because they say they would do that for real, I'd say, okay, you could do it for real, but we got to do a saw station first. You show me you can do it. Otherwise, we'll be here all day and it's not going to work. Does it make sense? I mean, so it's kind of hone it in, but it truly is simple, but it has to be thought out.
So I'm going to raise my hand. I have a question now because I'd be interested to know your take on it. And I've been part of kind of both of these evolutions. If you give a assigned objective evolution for, say, company level training or something you do you ever time it and then basically like post the times? So, hey, we're gonna time you today of how long it takes you to do this. Now, a lot of places will do that for performance standards, and then maybe add, a percentage on top of it that this task should be completed, in this amount of time as a benchmark. But have you ever been part of your training, either IFD or FDTN, and what's your perspective on timing evolutions? Different companies coming in and doing the same thing.
So I will tell you that Mike Kirby just retired out of Cincinnati. He used to time his company all the time. And I would say his use of time was a self-reflective view of his company, and they all bought into it. They wanted to get better. And he had a time, and he wanted the line to the front door in this amount of time. So I think for that, it worked. I've personally never used it, and I think we've been able to not have to do that because time is basically just another agitator form, right? You put time on, it's like putting on a blackout mask. If I say I'm going to black you out, well, I'm already in their head and they're pissed off and they're real mad and they don't want to do it. And then if we said, okay, there's a time clock on you now, it's going to maybe make them make mistakes. And the only thing I'd say about out here at the network, we can replace time with heat, smoke, and fire, so we don't have to worry about time. So, I personally have not used it for that. But I understand why people are using it. It's to try to accelerate and try to maybe make people make mistakes and do those types of things. But I would almost say, if you do it, try to find another way to introduce a few more obstacles that, even though time's important, the reality of the light bulb going on personally and saying, boy, did we screw the pooch on that one. We need to get better at this. I would rather they do it based on a performance flaw than a time clock. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I think if you look at the objective of the timing clock, it's to cause some anxiety in them. Would you say, at a certain point, you're trying to cause some kind of personal response. And I think you might be able to do that by adding another obstacle here or there. Mm-hmm. So I think it's all the same, though. You're really trying to ramp up. It's one more straw. We pride ourselves here, anyway, of being able to read a student quickly and try to push them further than they ever thought they could go in some really intense, tough conditions. And, if we do it really well, they don't realize it for a couple of weeks. And that's even better. That means that, they're so exhausted because we're trying to beat the crap out of them and give as much as we can. And then when they go back and reflect on all this stuff, all of a sudden it starts making sense. And there's more stuff to talk about with their own crews. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you. That's a question I never asked you, and we were kind of on a tangent. I was interested in see what you had to say. We just clicked over the hour mark here, Jim. So let's click through on a few more slides if you want to get to anything else that's on your mind.
So I came across this thing. I'll just put this up here. This is kind of where we are right now, and you can look at I found a picture on the internet, and I thought it was pretty funny. And somebody said something when I was in Portland this year about how their kids were learning math. And I came across a picture, and I couldn't find it to put it on here. But have you guys seen it? That new way they teach kids how to do math?
Yes.
Tens or something.
Yep.
And so I saw that. It was pretty interesting to me because, as I looked at it more and more, it's like you do quick math, you are taking the tens, but it took me a while to figure that out. So maybe a new way of learning, I don't know. But this is where we are in the fire service now. the two small pictures are just pump panel pictures. You guys have seen them. And, we've come to the point now where we have apparatus pump operators that they know how to push set or line one, but they have no idea how to actually figure out, all the mechanics of the line pressure and the friction loss and the multiple lines pumping and all that kind of stuff. And I think that kind of technology is hurting us, not helping us. And even in training, we use very little technology in training. Like maybe the biggest technology boost we have in the fire end of it is we don't use road flares anymore. We use a butane torch, a little small one. But really, everything else is about the same. But don't dumb down the material. Make sure guys understand it intimately. I guess that I would say that. And every one of us has to always try to be aware of that. And I'd just say, who's got the latest iPhone or Android, and tell me why the last one wasn't working fine and you needed the next one. You follow what I'm saying about technology? So I would say, try not to get wrapped up in that. When it comes down to it, the training aspect, it's just, you have to find a way to make the basic engine and truck company skills sexy somehow. And you have to do it. You have to do it over and over again, and you have to keep doing it. And if it gets boring, then find a different place to do it. Maybe have somebody else come up with the training. I can tell you what we did in the firehouse, and I was absolutely, hated for it, and it is what it is. But we had to make a barter deal one day that the guy wanted us to wear long pants, and most of us hated them. So we wanted to wear the BDU shorts. And so we made a deal with him that said, we'll do a training session every day if we could just stick to the collar strip or the BDU shorts. And he was okay with it. And then, where anarchy came in is we said, all right, whoever cooks that day has to do a 20-minute training session. And you can imagine how that went over. And it lasted for over a year. And I could tell you, the upper level people that heard about it and all this stuff, how it was a problem. But you find those people that were on the crew at the time, a lot of young guys had come to Firehouse, and it gave them an opportunity to go over some stuff, and got beat up because, we were putting them on the spot and trying to make them fail. And what I tell you again, the objective of the training, believe it or not, was only to get them comfortable talking to different people. It had nothing to do with giving anything of major substance. And we told them, it's like, just take something and go over how to use it. Everything in this. And so we were in a firehouse. We had a squad, an engine, a truck, and then we had this unmanned rescue unit. And everyone gravitated to the rescue because that was the only thing that everybody trained on together. And so we kind of, said in the background, watch out what happens when we run out of shit to do off the rescue. Because then it's going to get real, because then they would have to talk about engine stuff and truck stuff, which became very, very difficult. But there was all kinds of things. They picked their own topics, door chocks, how to start a fan, how to start the hydraulic equipment. It was something simple, but it got everybody touching stuff every day. It got everybody doing something. And, it lasted for a while. I'd say we tried it, it worked, but boy, I guess the aggravation for it, was another one of those things that, was another needle on the haystack that did me in eventually, But think about those things. Just be creative and do what you can. You guys have the banner. I had it up on the front, and you guys got them in the back. There's more instantaneous access to material now than there ever has been. And everyone's a publisher, but very few are editors. And I think I kept the next slide in there. So here's the next slide if you look at, and, I'll beat them up too. I would say my father was involved in the very first IFSTA book. So I'm beating up IFSTA, so I'd probably beat him up a little bit. But in those early versions, they would try to standardize. But here's a picture, and you guys can see it, right? And everybody's seen it. And then the one on the right is it just came out in the latest, one of the latest Firefighter One manuals. I can't remember which one, but I think if you look at it somewhere, it basically says it says right here, VES is a very dangerous method and should not be used. So, so what I would say with that is now come to grips with that material in people, and then you get them on a, let's say, a truck company, a busy truck company in your department, and you're talking about VES, and the imprint mentally that they're carrying with them is, you know, we shouldn't do it, it's too dangerous. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff working against us, but stick with the things that you know will work and practice them to perfection. And then the next slide, you know, it's, we see this a lot. Everybody's trying to come up with something new, whether it's a new title, a new name for something, a new gimmick to do something. You know, all I would say is just kind of, we've prided ourselves, and I can truly say this, the very first engine truck company class we ran, and the first formal one was here in 2003, has the same exact skill set and techniques that we ran last year and will run whenever we're able to run one this year. So for us, nothing really has changed. Nothing's come along to actually change how those things worked. And I always talk to, I know we go down to Orlando, Mike Champo and Greg are out there doing some forcible entry. And I know one of the things you always have is put a 6-foot hook on a Halligan to gain leverage and force that door. And so I asked in Portland, and you know, I asked a lot of people, so how many are proficient at forcible entry? And you know, it's not a trick question. Either you are or you're not. If you ask me, I'm gonna say, yeah, I think I'm proficient at it. Is the door gonna kick my butt? Well, I hope not, but you know, it may. But I hope that when it's kicking my butt, I can say to the big guy with me, hey, take a shot at this thing. I'm just too old and not strong anymore. Or maybe we need to take a different approach to this. But so I always ask, how many people have married 2 Halligans to gain leverage to force an outward swinging door? And how many have ever married a Halligan with a 6-foot steel hook to gain leverage to force a door? And you always see hands go up, and it's not, I know those things are out there. And then my final question is, how many have forced multiple doors in high heat, heavy smoke, no visibility, where every time they move up, they feel like they're starting to burn up because it's too hot? And then you see almost no hands go up. And that's where I say, you know, the other stuff may work, but we need to hone in on those basics, and we need to do them over and over again. And when you're doing them on that door in the firehouse, it's great, but you need to move on and then do more and more of it, and then eventually get in that environment to perform it. And it's not that difficult to do. I mean, you take that 20-foot burn container you have, and you may not get all the heat, but you can smoke it up with real smoke. And it's funny what real smoke does to the psyche versus fake smoke. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, you're in their head a little bit. And when you obscure the visibility in there, it's a completely different ball game. So whether it's stretching or ladders or forcible entry or ventilation on a roof, you need to just stick with those basics and just perfect them over and over and over again. And, you know, if you don't have the stuff for venting roofs, go to the grocery store and get a bunch of pallets. And worst case, that's what you have to use. You have to do something to use equipment, because without doing that, you're not really learning the saw intimately. And then those are things you have to do as well. So it makes sense. I mean, hopefully it's helping guys a little bit. I'd say the biggest hurdle to doing realistic training and valuable quality training, the biggest hurdle is usually us. It's not anything tangible out in front of us. It's usually we don't put the work in for it, or I would tell you this other one, this perception bubble that's out there, and we all suffer from it, and that is we all think we're way better than we are. And I always say the beach ball, you know, big beach ball is like this, tennis ball is like this. Beach ball is what our perception is, tennis ball under high heat, heavy smoke, no visibility. That's what our reality is. And what we need to do is make our reality maybe a softball, maybe the size of a bowling ball. We're not going to get it to the, maybe we get it to the beach ball. If we do, it's for that time on that session, maybe that real tough door on one fire. But if you rest on your laurels on that and don't go back and go right back to the basics, then that was a one time, get a picture and frame it, because you may not perform that way again next time. Because mastery is not an end point. It really is a destination that you'll never truly achieve. It's something that you have to work at all the time to get to. And it's mastery of those basic skills that we just have to do over and over again. So this is it for the demo. I'd say don't be this guy as a trainer. So that's what I would kind of say about just training in general. Don't be focusing on all that crap out there. Focus on those basic mechanics that truly have worked for 20 years and more. And you guys, in the nozzle business know it better than anyone. What's old is new again, right? That spins around. And it, used to say it's a 20-year cycle. There's this wheel that turns, and what you were doing is going to come back around, and it's what you're going to be doing again. And
I've said this, a couple of you guys have heard me say this before, but it's true about the basics. Like, my mom just retired last year after 37 years being the secretary in the Notre Dame football office, right? So she was hired under Jerry Faust and retired under Brian Kelly. And guys give me a hard time about being a Notre Dame fan and going to school there, but hey, man, they paid the bills growing up, right? But a couple of years ago, we were kind of getting back on this back to basics thing. And then you'd see conferences or classes where this really weird thing that maybe you might have counted this once in your life or your career. And I asked my mom, I go, hey, can you find out for me what the NCAA regulates for practice every day, right? Because that's regulated. Whether you are Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, USC, Michigan, or Wyoming State, right? You get 2 hours a day and pads, right? So what are you going to do during that time? You're going to practice the basics, right? You're not going to practice the Statue of Liberty, trick plays. I guess it works for Boise State that one season. But regardless, you're going to focus on the basics, right? And then when it happens and you get that oddball thing, you're then going to be able to react because you're that good at the basics, right? But when you're not in full pads practicing, what are you doing, right? You're watching film, you're reading the playbook. There's other things you can be doing. So same thing, you're not at a full speed on air live fire drill. What else can you be doing? Watching stuff like this, right? Reading. I really like what Jerry said earlier about your personal training plan, especially in these days. Guys are starved for training, and stuff that the department might be doing might be pushed down to the company level. But just because you're not in full pads, what else can you be doing? And when you're in full pads, what are you going to be practicing, right? It's those basics that are going to make you dominant on the football field. And then when you encounter that weird situation, you can get through it, right?
There's an interesting comment just came up. Chris Michael says, so stick to the basics, but don't stop learning. That's really it. We see each other on the circuit all the time, right? What are we all doing when we're not teaching? Mm-hmm. We're going to somebody else's session.
Yeah.
Right. It never ends. Jim, I think, one of the best nuggets, and I think it's worth repeating, is clarity in the objective of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think way too many drills try and accomplish too much, right? So you paint this big picture of the end game. Okay, the fire goes out. Well, how many individual things have to happen before that?
Right.
Right. So if you don't break it down to each one of those being an individual objective, operationally, how can you expect it to have a positive outcome? And you're right. Talk to the person who's running the drill. You set them up for failure.
No, and I think that it's basics. People have said it all along. I kind of laugh. My inside knowledge of FDIC in the theme of FDIC, there was always a theme, and they probably still have them, but the theme of FDIC in 1980 was bouncing back to the basics. That's pretty funny. And it was all about the basics. So,
especially because I was born in 1980, just to make you guys feel even older. So 39 years ago, we were all about the basics 39 years ago.
And so it's, there's a couple slides I'll just say, and just to reiterate, but we've forgotten how to focus. I just talked about the overinflated opinion of our abilities. Everyone's an expert at what somebody else did wrong. And this is rampant, and it just has to stop. You need to be an expert at what you did wrong and go back to doing more basic training so that you don't do it wrong if it happens. Don't argue, just learn the job and perfect it. And the whole one-liners and catchphrases, that's one that is kind of a little bit crazy now. So another one here, and I laugh all the time, guys want advanced level stuff. And all I would tell you is that there really isn't advanced level training. There's only advanced level performance. And what we do to make a drill tougher is increase the obstacles and the conditions inside the building.
I think we lost Jim.
You there, Jim? Yeah, stand by there, Jared. Why don't you take it over? We'll get Jim back down here.
Yep. We really appreciate the comment feed. It's going along well. And I think the interesting thing about this subject matter is that we're all thinking about a drill we were at or one we did that went well or didn't go well. And now you can start to think about the things of why. The diversity, and this is something that you definitely get out of FDTN, because they know they're not always teaching to, a career firefighter with a high level of work. The breadth of the American Fire Service forces a good instructor to teach to the group. And the group, by and large, it really doesn't matter. The standard should be the same. It doesn't matter if you're in a single engine fire department that goes to one fire a year, or you get one, 2 or 3 every 24-hour shift. The standard needs to be the same. It's proficiency and mastery of those skills that come together to give the end game, right? And it's interesting. I'm watching the comments, but I'm thinking of drills and courses that I've been involved with, and why they went well or why they didn't go well. And Jim has said it right along a couple times. Think. It's just like, someone that has their shit together in a fire is thinking the fire too, right? They're anticipating based on what they've been exposed to, but they're thinking. And I don't know, this cut and paste thing and these acronyms has gotten us to the point where we are trying to create non-thinking firefighters. The successful firefighter in my mind for years when I was involved with training was somebody that can operate alone and have a comfortable level to operate alone. And, that I think when we talk about going back to the basics, we really should do it because a lot of people aren't. Mm-hmm. Welcome back, Jim.
Yeah, I know what happened.
It's live.
That's like technology.
Yep.
Overcoming obstacles, right? So I would say, lastly here, at least for these, and then training's your responsibility. It's not anybody else's. And even when you're working in the fire department, if you're waiting for the fire department to give you the training you need, then you're not doing your job. Because it really is, the fire department's going to give you what they can. And the bigger the department, the more difficult it is for them to give you a whole lot of stuff. It's just a logistical nightmare. We did some training in Indy way, it was like 2006, I think. And it took us to touch every company, and that was bringing them in 6 at a time. It took us 12 days in a row to do that. So a lot to deal with. So I would say, accept it's your responsibility. Go out and do the training that you need to do. Understand the more you practice, the better you become at it. Stop believing that talking about practicing is the same as practicing. This is one of those things that gets a lot of people. And just master the basics. I mean, hopefully you found that. And I think reality training of the basics is a sequential process that starts just really honing in on those skills, and hopefully you have the opportunity to ramp the environment up so that eventually those skills get performed in the environment you're working in, which is where you'll truly start to get at a much higher level of performance. But don't just jump right into the live fire drills and think you're going to pull those skills off. I think we were talking about it. That's what happens too often.
I'm throwing this question up from Hannah Elliott. Jerry, a common excuse I hear is you're never alone on the fire ground. So why should I train to that level of comfort?
I'm glad you put that up there. Hannah, I'm kind of give you a canned response. It's something I say a lot when I'm in an instructional setting in the field. Picture yourself, it's you and I on an initial attack on a single story wood frame dwelling. There's 3 or 4 bends to get to the fire. I'm on the nozzle. We start together. We hit to the first 90. We make the corner. Now I go 10 feet down the hall and I'm taking another 90. Where are you? You're at the pinch point, which puts me alone and you alone. We're in voice contact. We probably can't see each other. That's the level of proficiency I'm talking about. Is you still have to navigate that situation. You're not always going to have somebody on your hip. The comment I had made about someone that can work independently is driven primarily by they have a comfort level in what they're performing to the point where they don't have to be distracted by asking a question or reverting back to something that they're not comfortable with. It's someone that can operate in that environment independently, driven by thought because it's been repeated from a task standpoint. So yes, I get it. We're always in twos, but you're only in twos for a period of time on a fire attack. That's what drove my comment.
Okay.
So hopefully that helped. And I would just say, to add to it, there's many times that you have to understand everybody's role in the training as well. Sometimes if you always do training and you're always the officer and you're never, behind and not doing that, you don't understand all those aspects. So you need to intimately know every position and then realize, like you said, Jerry, there's going to be times that you're split up. And a lot of those times, they're bad times. There's normal times when you're not operating together. But then a lot of fatality reports, read them, and they found those people by themselves. So something went wrong and they were by themselves. So first off, the comfort level is what you want to develop it as an individual. And, I always tell guys that are struggling in some of the difficult things out here, if you start struggling as an individual, now just put your struggle off on somebody else and see how they're doing. And you can kind of, shed a lot of your responsibilities for you by helping somebody else. And it just makes things a little bit better off for you in that time frame. So just really understand it's kind of like, the blackout comment or something. Why would we train? Don't train like that. No, there's going to be times that you are completely blacked out. And the condition is, if the light would have bought you some comfort, and it was department light, then did they charge it? did the light go out? Really, a lot of guys say, why would I buy a light? Because the department provides them. It's like, I want my own light because my light goes in my locker at night and then it comes out with me the next day. Just one of those things, a little anal about that, but I want to make sure my shit's working all the time. And I'd rather have mine than the community stuff, because the community stuff is seeing other people tomorrow and other people yesterday. So.
Yep. 100%. What do you think, Jerry? You want to wrap it up here?
Yeah, we probably should. We're pushing past 9:30.
What I'd like Jim to talk about real quick before we wrap, and this has been great, and I hope everybody's gotten some nuggets out of this. I certainly have. Obviously we can find you Fire Department Training Network on Facebook, on the internet. I just would like to take a little bit of time to give you the opportunity to really kind of explain the variety and some of the stuff you're doing at FDTN. We've been honored enough to come down and be part of your company officer class. I've hung out when you've done the combat class, and then I've yet to attend, but I hear rave reviews about the one you do in the fall about basically building your own props out of your containers. So to put it up on the tee for you, the combat class, you're coming over several days and you're just running, working fire after working fire after working fire. It's incredible showing up and seeing these guys just rolling out, packing a hose, going back. You're working 24-hour shifts. It's insane. And guys are coming together with their crews that they work with every day. Just talk about the dream of coming with the same 3 or 4 firemen you work with every day. And now over 3 or 4 days, you get to run 60, 70 working fires. You're going to know each other's in and out right away. And then I think what's you're very humble, Jim, and we all know that, and we appreciate that about you. But the class you do about basically you can come take a class from you guys and you basically show your secrets of, hey, here's what you got to do to build your own training center. Here's what you can do with can manipulation. Here's what you get. And, am I wrong with that?
No. And I wish they would, especially for the designing class. So the host of classes we have one class, and it kind of built the foundation of the network, which was the RIT class and the RIT trainer. We just, we did the timing right early on and wrote a couple books to support the program and allowed the, people to go back and teach the program at their department. But it's the one class we don't do live fire in. And then everything else we do live fire. And we've had a series of engine company classes and truck company classes that they're just a combination of dry run skills with smoke and fire. And then we always try to end classes with combined operations, how a fire ground would work. And we all, in the early years, not knowing, because it was, uncharted ground for us, we went with a level 1, level 2, level 3, figuring that we would have a pool of enough people that took the level 1, that was the prerequisite for level 2. And then the same with the level 3. And what we found, when we finally got to that level, the level 3 hit a bell curve really quick, and then we just couldn't seem to fill it. So one of the things that we always try to do is put more fire in the classes, but only if it's appropriate for the learning of the skill. So as you go to the second level classes, you're doing more skills, and more of those are live fire skills. And the difference between the 1 and 2 in the engine truck series is the level 1 classes are static response fires. It means, and I'm not a big fan of it, but again, the fires are objective based to attack a first floor fire, attack a second floor fire. So those fires start with a line positioned out at the front door and the entry team ready to force that door. And as you get to the next classes, the level 2 classes, they're full-blown response classes. So you'll arrive on an engine or truck, and if we have enough drivers and people, you'll arrive on 2 engines and 2 trucks to a fire. and then go to work. You'll be staggered so that your arrival is not right on top of one another, just like you would do, on the street. And those are smaller scale. And we always wanted to get to the point where we could do more of that. And then that combat class you talked about was the whole idea behind that was to try to develop operational muscle memory. And that was where I said earlier, we're really good at skills and we do some operations, but we can never do enough operations to just make you sick of doing operations and have to default back to what you know because you're too tired to do anything else. So the combat class, you come in on the morning of day one, you're assigned a battalion, and if you come with your own people, even better, because you stay with your own people. And you go out and you check your rigs, and in that battalion, there's an engine and truck. You're assigned, if you start on the engine, every 4-hour block. So if you start in the morning on the engine, after lunch, you're on the truck, the next morning on the engine, back and forth, and we go through 7 tour changes. So Monday afternoon, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And in that, up to now, we had 3 battalions, and you got 35 working responses and probably 30 working fires. And we always wanted to create a level of complacency during the response. And that would mean we wanted you sitting there doing something and then, catch you off guard, but it didn't really work out. Because if you picked up, you're probably going to another fire. And what we found in that, and I think it kind of corroborated the intent of it, was the first day, they're kind of like warm-up calisthenics. They're not difficult fires. It's like everybody just kind of get the feel for the place. By day 2, there's some pretty major screw-ups. And it's, to a T, every class does it. And the first few, they needed an ass chewing on the end of day 2. And then lately I'm softer now, so it's not quite an ass chewing, it's just a nice talking to. But by day 3, they're firing on the same page. I mean, they are knocking these fires out, and then they hit the wall physically because they're at, probably the 22nd fire, and they're just exhausted. And then it goes to right where we wanted them, and that is they're so tired, they can't overthink it. They default back to the skills, and then they're in the real learning mode that truly should help them when they go back on the street. And so that's been very successful, and it kind of culminated that track. And if we could do it longer, we would. But so like I said, up to now, we added a 4th battalion because really, all the fires, I'd say 24 of the fires that they went to were understaffed by 2 companies by design. They were just working their ass off, and we weren't giving them any help. So we added another battalion, and believe it or not, in adding the battalion, we picked up 7 more fires per battalion in the same time frame. So
how long is the class? 4 days?
4 days.
And how many fires over 4 days?
So it used to be 115, and now it's probably going to be somewhere around 130 working fires. And they're not, chump change fires. They're pretty good fires. And they're live. And one of the things we found with it is, like in all the other classes, we're doing skills before we're doing the operational fires. So we're kind of reviewing the hose stretches, and we're reviewing forcible entry and searches. And we found a couple of these in the combat classes that we're not reviewing those skills. And sometimes they're doing very poorly on some of them. So what we've kind of built into the classes coming up this year is somewhere in the Monday afternoon to Tuesday morning, we will actually have one of the fire sets they go to is going to be a live training fire where we're given a little bit of skill just to make sure. We have a basement prop that, the ranch is a really, really difficult basement stretch. And we've never had nobody reach it until we hit these combat classes. And then, you'd think, wow, really, we never thought about it. But again, maybe a little bit of that perception bubble was burst, but they weren't making the basement fire. And it's like, when we analyzed all of it, we said, in every other one, we're working with them with hose stretches. And in this one, we're kind of letting them go to work and do that. So that combat has been the culmination of that. And then we do an officer and a training officer, a search class, a rescue company class, which, you kind of look at what's old is new. We did advanced RIT classes for years, and the only difference was live fire. And then they just went off, we couldn't fill another one. And it incarnated as a rescue company operations class. And we got to turn people away now. So, which is good. But it's all just skills under fire, more skills under fire, more skills under fire. And that's, I would tell you just a kind of a shout out, Aurora, Colorado, in the very first fire combat class, took every seat but one. They took 26 of 27 spots in the class. 2 chiefs, 24 officers and firefighters. And we only had 1 chief from some other department, but they did it, and most of them did it on their own dime.
Wow.
And it was all, which was the design. I mean, what would be a better place than, crazy me, to go on vacation with your crew, just to go to some place where you just go to fires all day long.
115 fires in 4 days. Yeah. The beach is good, but I don't know.
But it's just stretching lines. It's doing all those things that you're doing over and over again, so that now, 2 months from now, when you get that fire, it happens, but you got to go back if you weren't with your crew, and you got to get those other guys on that same page and help them.
And then the build class. So say you're a training officer, higher level chief, whatever. And there was a question earlier about trying to get creative with budgets. And I know there's kind of limited companies that will come and build, container buildings for you. And then, the feedback I always hear is like, well, we spent a lot of money and it's like, okay, or we wish we would have done this or whatever. So can you just give us a little snippet about your build class that you do, where you kind of like, essentially show some of the secrets of what you learned since the year 2000, 2001, since you started this thing off?
So the class is designed to open up people's minds about the fact that these are really inexpensive. And if you design them right, they'll do everything you need. I think one of the first things, people go buy a commercial training building and it doesn't do what they want. They're always trying to improvise. They're always trying to come up with something because it wasn't set up. And that goes way back to those objectives. So the very first part of the design class is we sit down and talk about a training needs assessment. And it's boring and nobody wants to do it. But if you don't do it, then you don't know how to build a building. And it's talking about the training that you're doing. But when we get to the container portion of it, we try to talk through everything about foundation, about how you stack them, how you put them together, the layout that you need so that they can go back and do it. And I got to be honest, it's simple stuff to do. And it's pretty easy and inexpensive. But it's also starting to be controlled more. I hate to say, as you look at the standards and all that stuff coming down, they're trying to kind of, squash the homegrown mentality, but I still think it's the way to go. But the idea is it's never big enough that we can't, if you want to come to it, work through designing your own custom building while you're here at class. And then whether you build it yourself or have somebody else do it, that's something you have to come to grips with. The bigger the department, the less likely you're going to build it yourself. The smaller the department, the more likely you are. So we've talked about selling a couple of the common designs, and I just can't pull the trigger on it. We've had it ready to go for a long time, and I just can't seem to do it. But one of the other things we do is we do consult a little bit, and we went down to Fort Lauderdale and got them underway. They had all the ground ready, all the footings poured, and in 4 days, basically, the whole, the deal with them was we were going to do in 4 days everything we could to build as much as we could and then leave them with what they needed to finish it. And I went down there March 1st, and they just sent me 2 videos today where they burned in the first one today, and they're going to burn in the second one tomorrow.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It was basically a double T like we have here, and then a modified version of the apartment building that we have. And I think, they've got next to nothing in it.
Awesome.
So, if any questions, you don't have to come to the class. You know, if guys have questions about it, all you got to do is email. You know, if you go to FD training, the email will come right to me, and you know, I'm usually pretty responsive. But you know, if I don't have the time to answer fully, I might wait a day till I can answer it. But you know, I'll help anybody that wants to help, because it really is only going to benefit people. And I think once they do it, they'll, just like everything, say, why did we wait so long to do this?
It's info@fdtraining.com, right?
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the comments. And again, the website, fdtraining.com. If you go there, that's their site. They have everything posted, what's available for registration wise. I will make a little plug for the newsletter. It's very affordable. It comes monthly. Jim sends these things out to you anymore. You know, it's kind of funny, like you don't get much mail. So you kind of look forward to getting this like FD training newsletter in the mail. It's got great articles by legit writers. And not like you said, I liked earlier when you said, you know, the old magazines used to flip to the Tom Brennan back page, and then the rest of it was kind of fluff. So
I got a question. Maybe somebody out there can post the answer to it. Why is it that when you go in the firehouse in the reading room, that you can only find a 10 to 15-year-old fire engineering, but you can never find the current one? You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. In the reading room, how is it you go in the bathroom and it's always the 10 to 15-year-old one that came out of nowhere, but the current one's never around? But 10 years from now, it'll be the one you were looking for.
Right.
I don't know. I wondered if somebody I was just curious. Sock, you know, I don't know where it goes.
If you have an answer, I just posted Jim's email. Send it off to him, info@fdtraining.com. But Jim, man, thank you so much for taking some time and sharing some of the things you've learned. Thanks for your passion for the fire service and being so open and honest and humble with us. And we encourage everybody to go check the place out. You know, you told me this, and I've heard other guys say it, and you know, on one of our many visits, and you're like, you know, it is like Disney World. You know, he goes, for every instructor you see, there's 4 or 5 guys behind the scenes shoveling out containers, loading new OSB in, getting the fires going. So essentially, the student has a seamless experience, right? We've all been in those classes where it's like, well, okay, we need to wait a little bit till the container gets hot, or we get the wood going, or don't put the fire out. You know, we've all heard those comments. At your place, you have the support on the backside where it truly is, you know, it's a visit.
That goes, and I appreciate that. And I had talked, you know, the logistic guys are running nonstop. You don't see them in pictures because they're always working, doing something. But it goes back to that thing about what was negative about training. You know, how many training sessions do you go to that you stood around and you were pissed off because you stood around and you weren't doing anything? And that was part of what you never wanted. And that was, and always has been my goal. I don't want people not liking it. I want them to, you know, my goal is to have them want to come back. I mean, that's really it. And when they come back, my other goal is to try to have something that wows them again when they round that corner. And, you know, it was easy the first class because I think I put a picture up recently where it looked like, you know, some guy said, what the hell am I doing here? But, you know, we try to make it look a little bit better. But I would say it is. And I want to thank you guys. We've had, you know, a couple of longstanding vendors, yourself and a couple others, not nearly as many as people would think, but the loyalists, and you guys have been one of them, have helped make this place what it is. And, you know, honestly, we're a low budget operation and we couldn't do it without the help of guys like you. So I want to say thank you for doing this, and kudos to the Brass Tacks thing, because I think it was silent assassin knowledge that people needed that nobody was waiting for.
And one last little story that I'm going to slide in is about a year ago, we gave Jim a bunch of our XD nozzles So we'll soon be out with the 1-inch version. So like a booster line, smaller body nozzle. And he uses a lot of those for fire control. So we figure what better place than to get some miles on some in a short amount of time than to give some to Jim. And I stopped by once and said, hey, how the nozzle's holding up? You got one I can see? And he go, well, I think there's one over here. And he goes, we just burned one up. And I go, what do you mean you burned one up? Like it's a hunk of metal that, you know, like I've never seen one. I've seen them in bad conditions, but never burned up. And he goes, no, it was burned up. And the moral of the story was, you know, you can burn a container down, and it probably, you know, I'm throwing you under the bus here a little bit, but we all have our moments. And yeah, there was a little incident, and, you know, containers can catch on fire. So, you know, we appreciate you, Jim, and thanks for being on and sharing your knowledge and your passion.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Yeah, we're going to wrap it for tonight. Reach out, hit up Jim. You've got the contact information there. Chris is going to wrap things up. If you had a duck out, it'll be live tomorrow. You can get it off of our Facebook page. Thanks for attending tonight, and we'll take a look through the questions afterwards, and if there's anything we need to address, we will. Thanks.
You can hit up all of our Brass Tacks videos at brasstackshardfacts.com. They're all there, archived. They're great conversation starters with your crews in the morning, especially if you're trying to find something to do on the company level. 3 to 5 minute videos to get you talking and into a deeper dive. You can find technical info, see what's new at elkhartbrass.com. We are on all the socials, so you can find us there. In addition, as we showed you at the beginning, our little teaser for Rig Recon, Brass Tacks Hard Facts is for nozzle geeks. Rig Recon is going to be for apparatus geeks. And really, we all have a little bit of apparatus geek in us. So go follow Rig Recon on Facebook and Instagram. The first episode will be dropping this weekend. And they will continue to come on a variety of topics related to apparatus components. So I think you'll dig that. And then last but not least, we are proud to be part of the Safe Fleet group. So in that group, as you saw with the Rig Recon branding, that's FRC, Foam Pro, Elkhart Brass, and ROM, making a lot of high quality, high tech components that I guarantee you have on your rig right now. If you want to see what's new from us, you're speccing out a rig, that's safefleet.net/FEI. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe and stay healthy.
All right.